the day Keanu Reeves walked away. But Anna and Sydney made the world applaud. The night was quiet, yet heavy, as if the air itself carried a secret no one wanted to speak. Keanu sat alone in the backstage room, a single light above his head casting a tired shadow across his face. His eyes, calm but filled with weight, stared at the floor. People outside waited for him, expecting the man they loved to walk out, smile, and offer words of wisdom. But in his heart, Keanu knew tonight was different. For years he had carried respect, humility, and kindness as his shield. No matter how loud the world became, he answered with silence, patience, and grace. But tonight the voices outside were not filled with love. They were sharp, heavy with judgment. Whispers had turned into cruel words, and cruel words had turned into roars. Someone had spread lies, twisting his story, and now the crowd wanted him to explain, to defend, to fight. Keanu, however, had no wish to fight. He rose slowly from the chair, every step echoing against the empty walls. He reached the curtain, placed his hand on the fabric, and waited. His mind replayed the sound of people chanting his name, but now their chants were broken with anger. Instead of lifting him, their voices dragged him down. He closed his eyes and thought of the many times he had chosen silence over anger, patience over pride. And then, in that still moment, he made his choice. He would not go on stage. Keanu stepped away from the curtain, leaving the lights behind. His footsteps were steady, but his heart felt heavy. To walk away meant to invite more judgment, to let the world decide the story for him. But he also knew something deeper. Sometimes dignity is not in speaking, but in choosing silence. The hallway outside stretched long and dim. He walked slowly, knowing each step was carrying him further from the noise, closer to peace. What he did not know was that two people, sitting quietly near the edge of the stage, had seen his face as he turned away. Ana de Armas and Sydney Sweeney were watching closely, their hearts unsettled by what they saw. Both women had worked with him, had shared laughter and quiet talks in between long hours of filming. They knew his heart better than most. They knew his silence was not weakness. It was respect. Respect for himself and for others. Anna leaned toward Sydney, her voice soft but urgent. He cannot face this alone. They will not understand his silence. They will only see it as surrender. Sydney's eyes shone with both fear and fire. Then we cannot let him leave. If he walks away, we must step in. We must show them who he really is. At that moment, Anna and Sydney rose together, their decision made without another word. They walked toward the stage, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes waiting just beyond the curtain. The crowd outside was restless, some clapping impatiently, others calling out harshly, demanding Keanu's presence. The stage manager looked at them with confusion. Where's Keanu? It's his time. Anna and Sydney exchanged a look. They both knew the risk. People might mock them, laugh at them, or accuse them of interfering. But they also knew something stronger, the truth of Keanu's character, a truth that could not be hidden behind lies. Anna stepped forward first. We will speak. The stage manager frowned. You. But this is his moment. Sydney's voice was steady. It is his moment. But sometimes the world only listens when others tell the story. Tonight, we will tell it for him. The curtain began to rise, the light spilling onto the stage, and the crowd's noise grew louder. Anna and Sydney held their breath for a second, then stepped into the glow together. The audience gasped, surprised, expecting Keanu but finding them instead. And so began a moment no one in that room would forget. The night when Keanu chose silence, but his friends chose to speak. The night when the world, ready to judge, was made to pause and listen. They stood tall, with quiet strength, ready to defend respect, humility, and kindness, in a world that often forgot them. And in that moment, the story of the night changed. It was no longer about one man walking away. It was about two voices stepping in to remind the world why they loved him in the first place. Anna took the microphone, her hands steady, and Sydney stood close beside her, her eyes burning with resolve. And as the first words left Anna's lips, the restless noise of the crowd began to fade into silence. And silence this time was not an attack. It was respect. Voices that carried more than words. The crowd sat in restless silence, waiting for an explanation. Their anger had not yet left, but the sudden sight of Anna and Sydney standing under the lights had stolen their breath. Everyone expected Keanu, the man they came to see, yet he was not there. Instead, these two women stood tall, side by side, carrying a weight far heavier than applause or cheers. Anna raised the microphone slowly. Her eyes scanned the sea of faces, faces that moments ago were sharp with judgment. She knew they would not forgive easily, yet she also knew silence was not an option anymore. Keanu had walked away, but not because he was weak. He walked away because he refused to answer cruelty with more cruelty. "You all came here tonight to hear Keanu," Anna began, her voice calm but firm. "But before you judge his silence, you need to understand something important. Keanu has never been a man of empty words. He has always spoken through his actions, through the way he treats people, through the way he chooses kindness, even when the world offers him bitterness." The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers moved through the rows like wind passing over grass. Some people folded their arms, unwilling to be moved, but others leaned forward, curious, listening. Sydney stepped closer, her voice stronger, carrying emotion that even the farthest seat could hear. "You think he left because he is afraid. But the truth is, he left because he respects you too much to shout back. He respects himself too much to waste his voice on anger, and he respects humanity enough to believe silence can sometimes speak louder than words." A murmur ran through the audience. People looked at each other, some nodding slightly, others frowning, unsure. Anna continued, her tone soft but piercing. "We know Keanu. We have seen him off the stage, away from the cameras. We have seen him give without asking for thanks. We have seen him carry pain but still smile so that others could feel lighter. That is who he is. And that is the man you are judging tonight," Sydney added, her voice trembling with both fire and sincerity. "You came to demand a performance. But Keanu has never been about performance. He has been about truth. And tonight, the truth is this. He walked away because sometimes walking away is the most powerful act of dignity." For a moment, the hall was silent. The kind of silence that pressed against the heart, leaving no room for excuses. People in the front row lowered their eyes. Others sat frozen, not because they were defeated, but because they were forced to think. And then, an unexpected sound broke the silence. A single clap. It came from somewhere near the back. Soft, hesitant, but it carried across the hall. Then another clap followed, then another. Soon the sound grew, rising into a steady rhythm. People who had come with anger were now clapping with respect. The applause spread like fire until the entire room was filled with the sound of hands meeting in unison. Anna and Sydney glanced at each other, their eyes filled with relief, but also with something deeper. They had not only defended a friend, they had reminded the world of something it often forgets, that kindness is not weakness, and humility is not silence. Yet, even as the applause filled the room, both women knew this was only the beginning. Defending Keanu on stage was one thing, but the storm outside was bigger. The lies, the rumors, the twisted stories, they were spreading everywhere. This night had given the crowd a moment of truth, but the world beyond these walls was still waiting, hungry for answers. Anna whispered softly to Sydney as the applause echoed, "This is not over. We will have to stand again and maybe louder than before. Sydney nodded, her eyes shining with both strength and uncertainty. Then we will stand, as many times as it takes. And somewhere far from the stage, walking alone under the cold night sky, Keanu Reeves heard none of the applause. He only heard the quiet sound of his own footsteps, wondering if the world would ever understand the choice he had made. But what he did not know was that two voices were already turning silence into a roar of respect. The weight of silence outside the theater. The night was alive with voices louder than the wind. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and fans argued in the streets. Some defended Keanu with passion, calling him a man of dignity. Others claimed his silence was proof of guilt, twisting the moment into something it was never meant to be. The storm was no longer just inside the hall, it was spreading across the world. Keanu walked slowly down a quiet street, away from the noise. His coat was pulled close, his face hidden under the dim streetlight. Each step felt heavy, not because of the path beneath his feet, but because of the weight in his heart. He had always believed that silence could protect him, that it could protect others. Yet tonight, he wondered if silence had only opened the door for more cruelty. In another part of the city, Anna and Sydney sat together in a small dressing room after leaving the stage. Their hearts still raced from the applause, but their minds could not rest. The cheers had been powerful, yes, but they knew applause was only temporary. People could cheer one moment and turn cruel the next. Anna leaned back against the chair, her voice filled with worry. We did what we could, but the world outside, it is louder than ever. They will twist our words just as they twisted his silence. Sydney's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Then we cannot stop here. If Keanu chooses silence, then we must choose to be his voice. We must show the world who he is, not who they claim he is. Anna looked at her closely, eyes heavy with concern. Do you realize what that means? It means we will carry his battles. We will face the same judgment, maybe worse. They will try to break us too. Sydney's voice steadied, though her heart raced. Let them try. If we walk away now, then we are no better than those who betray truth for comfort. Keanu has carried so much for others. Maybe now it is time for us to carry something for him. A deep silence settled in the room. Both women understood the risk. To stand for him meant to invite the storm onto themselves. It meant becoming targets for the same whispers, the same cruel voices, but it also meant proving that kindness was not something fragile. Anna finally whispered, Then we stand, no matter what it costs. While they made this promise, Keanu found himself standing at the edge of a quiet park. The night was colder here, the trees swaying gently as if whispering secrets only the wind could hear. He sat on a bench, his head lowered. Memories filled his mind, moments of laughter on set, nights of loneliness in hotels, mornings when he gave more than he had, and evenings when he was left with nothing but silence. He thought of his mother, of her gentle wisdom. She had always told him, kindness will never protect you from pain, but it will always protect your soul. He smiled faintly, though the smile carried sadness. In that moment, a small group of strangers passed by. One of them recognized him, whispering his name softly. But instead of approaching, they simply nodded with respect and kept walking. It was a small act, almost invisible, yet it carried more warmth than the cheers of thousands. Keanu lifted his eyes to the sky, wondering if perhaps the world still had room for quiet dignity. Back at the theater, Anna and Sydney stepped outside into the chaos. Reporters swarmed instantly, microphones thrust forward, questions hurled like stones. Where is Keanu? Why did he refuse to speak? Is he hiding something? Anna stood firm, her eyes clear. He is not hiding. He is choosing dignity. If you want to understand him, look at the way he has lived his life, not the way you twist one night into a story. Sydney added, her voice sharp but respectful. You cannot measure a man's worth by how loudly he shouts when attacked. Sometimes silence is the greatest strength of all. Their words struck, not only against the questions, but against the hearts of those listening. Cameras captured every moment, and soon their voices began to spread across screens, across networks, across the world. But with every word they spoke, the danger grew. Some would listen with respect, others would twist their courage into something else. Yet deep down, both women knew the truth. The moment they stepped onto that stage, they had chosen this path, and they were ready to walk it, no matter how heavy it became. When truth faces the storm, the morning after the theater was unlike any other. The world had not slept. News channels replayed the moment Anna and Sydney stood on stage. Some praised their courage, calling it a defense of true character. Others mocked it, saying they were covering for Keanu, protecting him from questions he was too afraid to answer. Social media was a battlefield, voices clashing with no pause, no mercy. In the quiet of his apartment, Keanu sat by the window, the early sun painting his face in gold. The city below was loud, but his room was still. He had not turned on the television. He had not touched his phone. He knew what people were saying, even without hearing it. The world was always quick to build, quicker to destroy, and slowest to understand. Yet his thoughts did not rest on himself. They rested on Anna and Sydney. He remembered their faces under the stage light, the way they carried his silence like it was their own. He had not asked them to speak, yet they had chosen to. And now, because of that choice, they would suffer the storm too. Keanu whispered to himself, "They should not have to carry my silence." Meanwhile, Anna and Sydney sat together in a small cafe, hidden away from the noise. The air smelled of coffee and fresh bread, yet both women carried tension in their shoulders. They had slept little, their minds replaying the applause, the questions, the flashing lights. Anna stirred her cup slowly, her voice low. "We spoke for him, but the world wants more. They will not stop until they break something, either him or us." Sydney lifted her eyes, steady despite the fear inside. "Then let them try. If we fall with honesty. But I believe the truth will stand, even when we are tired." Anna's gaze softened. "You believe the world will choose truth?" Sydney paused, her lips trembling before she spoke. "Not the whole world, but maybe enough of it. Maybe enough to turn hate into respect, even if just for a moment." As they spoke, outside the cafe, a small group of strangers gathered quietly. They had recognized Anna and Sydney, but they did not shout or disturb. Instead, they simply stood in silence, watching, waiting. Then one of them, a young man, placed a small flower on the cafe window ledge. Soon another followed, and then another. Soon, the ledge was filled with flowers, each one left without words, each one carrying quiet respect. Anna noticed first, her breath catching. "Look." Sydney turned, her eyes filling with tears. "They understand." Inside that small moment, hope grew. It was fragile, yes, but it was real. Not everyone had chosen cruelty. Not everyone believed lies. Some hearts still recognized truth without needing to be shouted. But far away, on the other side of the city, another scene unfolded. A group of harsh critics gathered in a studio, preparing to broadcast their voices. They were ready to frame Keanu's silence as cowardice, ready to twist Anna and Sydney's courage into manipulation. They knew negativity spread faster than kindness, and they were eager to feed it. That night, as the broadcast began, millions tuned in. The hosts spoke with sharp smiles, their words cutting like blades. They mocked Keanu for walking away, mocked Anna and Sydney for standing beside him. They turned respect into weakness and humility into guilt. But something unexpected happened. As the critics spoke, messages began flooding the live broadcast feed. Not of hate, but of support. Strangers wrote about moments when Keanu had shown kindness. Stories from people who had met him quietly, without cameras, without headlines. Messages came from crew members, fans, and even people who had only shared a brief glance with him in the street. The hosts tried to ignore it, but the words filled the screen faster than they could speak. He gave his seat on the subway without anyone asking. He paid for strangers' meals and walked away without a word. He stayed with someone who was crying until they felt safe again. Story after story poured in, drowning the voices of cruelty. The critics, once so sharp, now looked small against the tide of kindness. And in his apartment, Keanu finally turned on the screen. He watched silently as the world that once judged him now began to defend him. Not with shouts, not with anger, but with simple, quiet truths. He closed his eyes, a tear slipping free, not from weakness, but from the deep weight of being understood. And in that moment, Keanu realized something. Silence alone could not carry the world, but silence, carried by the voices of others, could turn into applause greater than any performance. When kindness becomes a shield, the days that followed felt like waves crashing against the shore. Each morning brought new headlines, new debates, new voices ready to judge or defend. Keanu's silence had turned into a fire that the world could not stop talking about. Some called it weakness, others called it strength, but everywhere the discussion grew louder. Keanu, however, stayed away from the noise. He spent his mornings walking quietly through the city, disguised by a simple cap and coat, blending into the crowd. He found peace in small things, the smile of a child holding her father's hand, the gentle bark of a dog chasing after a stick, the way sunlight spilled through trees. He reminded himself that the world was more than cameras, more than voices shouting in anger. But he also knew the storm was not leaving. Anna and Sydney, meanwhile, were no longer just actresses or friends. The media had turned them into symbols, symbols of loyalty, courage, and defiance. Some praised them as protectors of truth. Others accused them of creating a story to distract from what Keanu was hiding. The pressure was heavy, but both women refused to back down. One evening, they were invited to a live interview. The host was known for being sharp, someone who thrived on breaking people down with questions. The studio was filled with lights, cameras, and an audience eager to watch. As they walked onto the stage, Anna and Sydney exchanged a look of quiet resolve. The host wasted no time. Why defend a man who refused to defend himself? Are you not worried the world sees you as covering for him? Anna took a slow breath, her voice steady. We are not covering for anyone. We are telling the truth. Keanu has always been a man of humility. He has nothing to prove, and yet he has always given more than people deserve. If he chooses silence, it is not because he hides guilt. It is because he respects humanity too much to answer cruelty with cruelty. The host leaned forward. But silence allows suspicion. Don't you think the world deserves answers? Sydney's eyes shone, filled with quiet strength. The world deserves truth. But truth is not always shouted. Sometimes it is shown in the way a man lives his life. Every small act of kindness, every moment of respect, every time he lifted others without asking for credit, that is his answer. If people cannot see that, no words will ever convince them. The audience shifted. Some clapped softly, while others sat thoughtful, silent. The host, sensing the room, pushed harder. So you believe kindness alone can protect him? Anna looked straight into the camera. Not only protect him, kindness can protect all of us. It is the only shield that does not break when struck. Her words hung in the air like something larger than a reply. The audience broke into applause, not thunderous but sincere, steady, growing louder with each second. The host leaned back, caught off guard. The moment was no longer about tearing down, it was about lifting up. And outside the studio, people watching across the world began to feel something they had forgotten: the power of respect. But as their voices grew stronger, so did the opposition. Late that night, headlines twisted their words again. Anna and Sydney dodge questions. Defense without proof. Silence cannot hide forever. The storm returned, darker, sharper. When Keanu saw these headlines, he closed his eyes and whispered, "They are fighting my battles. I cannot let them carry this alone." The next morning, for the first time since that night at the theater, Keanu picked up his phone. He dialed a number he had not called in years, an old friend, a mentor from his earliest days. When the call was answered, Keanu's voice was quiet but filled with resolve. "It is time," he said softly, "not to explain myself, but to remind the world what really matters." His friend's voice came warm and steady. "Then speak, not with anger, not with defense, but with the same kindness you've always lived. Let the world hear silence turn into light." Keanu hung up and sat still, feeling a new strength rising inside him. The storm was still raging, but for the first time, he was ready to step into it. Not to fight, not to shout, but to show the world that humility, respect, and kindness could stand firm, even when surrounded by doubt. And somewhere in the city, Anna and Sydney felt the same shift, as if the silence they carried for him was about to transform into something greater. The return of quiet strength, the world was waiting. For days, whispers filled the air. Would Keanu remain silent, or would he finally speak? Rumors spread, critics prepared, and supporters hoped. The storm was louder than ever, and every eye turned toward him. In his apartment, Keanu stood in front of the mirror. His reflection looked tired, but his eyes carried a calm fire. For so long, he had chosen silence, believing it was enough. But now, as he thought of Anna and Sydney standing in the line of fire for him, he knew silence alone was not enough. Silence had to become something greater, something that turned into light. He reached for his coat and stepped into the morning air. The streets were buzzing with life, yet every step he took felt deliberate, steady. He was not rushing, he was not hiding. He was walking toward something larger than himself. Later that day, news spread quickly. Keanu Reeves would appear in public, not on a film set, not at a premiere, but at a small community center in the heart of the city. Reporters swarmed, crowds gathered, cameras flashed. But when he arrived, there was no stage, no lights, just a circle of chairs filled with ordinary people, teachers, workers, young students, and elderly neighbors. He sat among them, no spotlight, no separation. The cameras tried to catch every angle, but the moment was not for them. It was for the people sitting with him. Keanu spoke softly, his words clear but humble. "I know many of you expected answers. Many of you wanted me to defend myself, to explain every rumor. But I cannot live my life chasing every shadow the world throws at me. What I can do is remind you of the things that matter, the things that no lie can erase: respect, humility, resilience, kindness." The crowd listened intently. There was no anger in his voice, no defense, only truth spoken with quiet strength. He continued, his gaze steady. "We live in a world that often rewards cruelty, where the loudest voices are the ones that tear others down. But I believe deeply that kindness is stronger, not because it is easy, but because it survives. It heals. It carries us when nothing else can. I am not here to fight anyone. I am here to live by that belief, even if it costs me." In the back of the room, Anna and Sydney stood together, their eyes brimming with emotion. They had carried his silence for days, defended him when the world turned its back. And now, Watching him speak with such calm dignity, they felt the weight lifting. Sydney whispered softly, "He doesn't need us to fight for him anymore. He is fighting in his own way." Anna smiled gently. "No, he still needs us, because even the strongest need hands beside them." As Keanu finished, the room filled with applause, not thunderous, but deep, sincere. It was the kind of applause that came not from excitement, but from recognition. People were not clapping for a performance, they were clapping for truth. Outside, reporters rushed to twist the words into headlines, but something unexpected began to spread faster than their stories. People who had been in that small room began sharing their own voices, not reporters, not critics, ordinary people. They spoke of the moment, the sincerity, the humility. Their words spread across social media, simple and unpolished, but powerful because they were real. He spoke about kindness like it was more important than fame. He didn't defend himself. He reminded us to respect each other. It was not about him. It was about us. The storm outside still raged, but something new was growing, a quiet resistance against cruelty, carried not by headlines but by ordinary hearts. And as night fell, Keanu sat again in silence, this time not heavy with doubt, but filled with a sense of peace. For the first time in days, his silence felt whole again, because it was no longer misunderstood. When the world finally applauded, the storm was not gone, but something had shifted. The voices of anger were still there, sharp and loud, but now they were no longer the only sound. Voices of respect had begun to rise, small at first, then stronger, carried by people who had seen the truth in simple acts of kindness. For days, stories spread from strangers who had met Keanu in quiet places, on a train, in a store, on the street. Stories of him giving up his seat, carrying groceries for someone in need, sharing food with the homeless without cameras nearby. Each story was small, yet together they painted a picture more powerful than any rumor. Anna and Sydney stood in the middle of it all, watching the tide change. They had spoken for him when he could not. And now the world itself was speaking. Their hearts were tired, but they felt a deep warmth knowing that kindness was no longer hidden. It was being seen. Still, a final test remained. A large public event had been planned weeks before, and despite the chaos, the organizers insisted it would go on. People whispered that Keanu would not dare appear, that he would hide again. Others demanded that he prove himself, as if kindness needed proof. The night of the event arrived. The hall was vast, filled with thousands, and outside even more gathered, holding signs, some of support, some of doubt. Cameras lined the aisles, ready to capture every movement, every breath. The air was heavy with expectation. Backstage, Keanu sat quietly, his hands folded. He was calm, yet he knew this moment mattered. Not because he needed to save his image, but because he needed to show the world that silence, humility, and kindness were not weakness. They were strength. Anna and Sydney entered the room, their faces glowing with determination. They sat beside him, one on each side, just as they had stood on the stage that first night. "Are you ready?" Anna asked softly. Keanu smiled faintly. "I don't know if anyone is ever ready, but I am at peace." Sydney reached out, taking his hand. "Then let's walk together." When the curtain rose and the lights flooded the stage, the hall erupted with noise, cheers, questions, doubts all tangled into one. Keanu stepped forward slowly, Anna and Sydney at his side. The three of them stood there, facing the storm together. For a long moment, Keanu said nothing. The crowd grew restless. But then he raised the microphone, his voice steady, soft, yet strong enough to silence thousands. "You wanted words from me. Tonight, I will give you only this. I have nothing to defend, because truth defends itself. I have nothing to prove, because kindness cannot be measured. I am not perfect. I am only human. But I believe, deeply, that respect, humility, and resilience are worth more than fame, more than applause, more than any defense I could offer. He paused, letting the words settle. The world can choose cruelty, but I will not. The world can choose judgment, but I will choose patience. If that makes me weak, then I accept it. But I believe it makes me stronger, and I believe it can make all of us stronger if we choose the same. His voice trembled slightly, but not from fear. It trembled from truth. Anna then stepped forward, her voice warm but firm. You wanted him to speak, but you must understand. His silence was never emptiness. It was dignity. And tonight, his words are not defense. They are a reminder that we all need. Sydney followed, her eyes shining. We are here because kindness deserves to be protected. We are here because sometimes the world forgets, but we will not let it forget. For a second, there was stillness. No applause, no shouts, just stillness. Then, from the back of the hall, a sound began. A single clap, strong and deliberate, then another, and another. Within moments, the hall was filled with applause. It rose higher and higher, echoing through the walls, spreading to the streets outside where thousands joined in. It was not forced, not shallow. It was real. It was the kind of applause that carried respect, not just excitement. People stood to their feet, some with tears, some with smiles. Strangers hugged each other, as if the moment was bigger than one man. It was about all of them, about the reminder that kindness could still win, that humility could still inspire, that silence could still speak louder than noise. Keanu stood there, humbled, his eyes wet. He looked at Anna and Sydney, who stood on either side of him, their hands joined with his. Together, they bowed slightly, not for praise, but for gratitude. And in that moment, the world did not see a man walking away. It saw a man who chose dignity, and two women who turned his silence into a voice that reached millions. The world applauded, not for a performance, not for a show, but for truth. And in the quiet that followed, Keanu whispered, almost to himself, but loud enough for Anna and Sydney to hear, "This is not about me. This is about us, about remembering what matters." They nodded, their hearts full. The storm had not vanished forever, but for this night, kindness had won.